there will be no real non-controlled currency in the world.
We're coming for you, banks.
Bitcoin is punk rock. Deal with it.
You split, we bankrupt you.
Do you use Lightning wallets to pay for things or not?
No.
Bitcoin Cash would be seen as more of a threat to the United States hegemony than Bitcoin.
Miles Town, what's your favorite kind of money?
Bitcoin Cash.
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast. Following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency, this is episode number 45, Bitcoin 2022, the conference, not the year, but maybe we'll talk about the year too, and the addictive cost of technology, featuring Duncan White. Today is Saturday, the 16th of April, 2022. I'm Jeremy. Jet is doing the producing. And my guest is another Australian. We're having an Australian series, the Down Under special from the very Down Under from Tasmania in Australia. He's an IT professional and I guess advocate for cryptocurrencies and their potential. Duncan, welcome to the show. How do you get into Bitcoin?
Oh, thanks, mate. Look, totally a pleasure to be on the podcast. Big fan.
Yeah, you're in the Telegram a lot, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, a little bit. Yeah. That's good chatting there and learning. Look, as you said, I'm in IT. So cryptocurrency wasn't a huge learning curve. I mean, for a few weeks there, I was staying up late at night trying to understand it. And we'll talk a little bit about my self-published essay later. That's really what led me to it. So that was, I think, 2019 is around about when I first got into BTC, and that's sort of often people's first exposure to it. Hey, absolute pleasure to be here. So big fan, and I know you yourself, you're in technology, but I really agree with you. Like, we really needed something to sort of in the pop culture, just something fun really is needed, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Things have to be engaging, and that's kind of one of the strangest parts about Bitcoin is that it doesn't have a marketing department. That's the point. It's decentralized. It is kind of an organic grassroots movement, but it's unlike a lot of other cultural trends or something where there is a very heavy direct economic aspect to it, right? It's not like any other social cause or things that people are working on. I mean, there's always going to be some financial element, right? Whoever is organizing a movement, might be getting donations, or people are hosting events, or somebody is, corporate sponsors are trying to kind of get involved in different ways. But Bitcoin has a very strange duality where on one hand it markets itself, and I'm really interested that you said you spent a couple of nights staying up all night reading about it, because that is a very, very common thing to have, very particularly from the earliest adopters usually had that strongly as well. And the reason was because at that time there wasn't much about it. So if you started reading a little bit about, there was not just pages and pages of information or forums or places to go. You sort of could read the white paper, and then you could read on Bitcoin Talk, and then you could read the Bitcoin Reddit a little bit, and then it was kind of up to that. That was kind of it. So you could actually absorb most of the information that was currently known or available about cryptocurrencies. But it's good to hear that even as time has gone on, there's still people getting sucked into that rabbit hole, and it truly is a very engaging thing. I guess as a paradigm shift, it's one that gets on people's mind. Once it takes a lot to get over that first jump or to be interested. I guess, especially if you're in IT and stuff, it's more your mind's already kind of working in that way. It sounds less weird or foreign, but once you sort of click on it a little bit, you start thinking about the technological aspects, there's the economic ramifications, then it sort of gets into politics, a bit into philosophy, a bit into kind of futurism, right? Is there any specific aspect you can think of that initially first captured your attention particularly?
Oh, I remember quite clearly looking at the Coinbase listing and seeing Bitcoin Cash and, why do they have to, what's this all about? This is so annoying. There's this, they're just confusing, they're muddying the waters, just making it confusing to pick different coins. They should all just pick BTC. That would be simple. And then I did get BTC and sort of was just playing with it, using it. There's nowhere here to use it locally, any crypto. But quickly soon I noticed these fees, and it was Roger Ver that actually on the Tom Woods podcast that originally, okay, that's what it's all about. That led me down that path. So yeah, thanks, Roger. It was a great presentation on that podcast with Tom Woods.
Yeah, it's one of those amazing exponential things where just the number of people that will credit him as the sort of source of their Bitcoin knowledge and everything is staggering. He's probably the world leader in that. If there was a high score of everybody, how many people in the world would say this was the person who got me into it? I'm sure he's probably number one, probably for all of cryptocurrency. I don't know, maybe Andreas Antonopoulos could be up there. And certainly if you adjusted for the amount of people, if you had like a referral scheme type of vibe where everyone you introduced, if they then introduced someone, it kind of referred back to you. You could trace this big tree diagram back to Roger Ver of a lot of even the other early Bitcoiners. They would also credit him too as well. So yeah, he's been crushing it for
and how much hate he gets for it as well. You know, he doesn't quit. It's amazing that he's St. Martin and St. Kitts recently, the how they've been in the headlines, and you see him in the video footage as well. He doesn't quit. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is actually amazing. And I think there's almost a sort of fate loves irony kind of component to it, because he got the name Bitcoin Jesus in the early days, which he actually dislikes, which is probably also another thing that justifies the fact that he got that label. But he got that label and he didn't really like it, and then he later became crucified for his passion by the whole community, and he got such a negative rep and everything. And it's just, he's truly unique in that regard, because nobody else who was as prominent as early in the Bitcoin community stayed as consistent with their ideals. That's essentially what it is. There's other people who could have been in a similar situation, except for the fact that they tended to flake out a bit once the heat got turned up, or they weren't as publicly known to begin with, or they also didn't get specifically character assassinated in the way that he did. Everybody needs a sort of bad guy to hate on something, right? It needs to have a public face, and it was just very unfortunate for him that he got the one that the sort of smear campaign decided, well, Roger Ver, this is the guy that we can target. And yeah, I mean, he definitely has made a couple of mistakes. I saw somebody posted on Reddit a little while ago. There's a couple of things that I would say he kind of did wrong, but they're very minor. There's really only two things, which was he made a video at Mount Gox shortly before it collapsed. And that was always a little kind of not suspect, but just at the time when it happened, because there was so much disaster around Mount Gox, the fact that he was involved and he made a video where he said, guys, I'm at the Mount Gox, because he was living in Japan, and he was known as well. Back then, reputation was also very, very hard to come by. I mean, it's probably still somewhat hard to come by and have credibility now, but just by nature of the scene being bigger and around for longer, there's more people who have been in the scene for 5 or 10 years, and you know that they're not just going to rug and disappear tomorrow, most likely, right? But back then, that was very, very rare, and so he was one of the few people who would have been in a position to do a video like that, and he did do that video, and then a couple months later, it all collapsed after he'd said that they were solid. So that was used, to sort of attack him. And I don't know what was going on behind the scenes. I don't think nobody really does, and I think I've seen him say, "Look, that wasn't the greatest video," but on the other hand, bygones are bygones, and by this point, it's definitely more than irrelevant. And the other thing he did was he did an interview with some sort of BTC maxi type of guy at some point, who managed to just wind him up. He's usually a very calm, very reasonable, very rational guy, but just on this one day out of the thousands of interviews he's done, he was having a bad day, and the guy just kept saying, "Oh, and BCash this, BCash that," and this was at the time when tensions were very, very high over this whole issue, and he just said to the guy about 3 or 4 times, "Look, can you not call it BCash? It's called Bitcoin Cash. Please just show some respect for me as your interview guest and just call it Bitcoin Cash." And the guy just kept, he knew that he had him right, and he just kept pushing it and pushing and pushing. And so eventually Roger just gives him the finger and just logs off the call. And that screenshot of that just has been reposted on Twitter 10 million times whenever Bitcoin Cash is going down and people want to chat. But those 2 minor things for over a decade in cryptocurrency, one of the sketchiest industries. It's actually amazing. There is essentially no one who's been around as long as him who has a cleaner rap sheet. So it's pretty ridiculous in that regard that he is the one that all the hate falls onto. But I don't know. I guess that's just the way it goes.
And I love Jet's recapture of that phrase. That's awesome.
Yeah.
BCash will BCash.
Exactly. We've got to fighting the narrative battle, right? Fighting the linguistic trickery. It's all about the public's perception, you know.
I mean, it did take me 4 years to come up with it, but it's here now.
Yeah, well, you were still the first one to do it, so it's recorded forever on this show, so there can be no doubt that whenever we have the linguistic anthropologists go back, it has caught on. I've seen it be used in a few places. It really did summarize it all effectively. So yeah, good to see there. Okay, all right, on with the price. Enough chat. We've had BCH had a good week. Crypto as a whole kind of was down every week when I'm making the slides. I always see what was the price a week ago or 2 weeks ago when I'm updating it. And so we're actually down a bit, about $30, I think. But BCH is basically up. The rest of crypto went down, and then BCH sort of rising through the crowd a little bit. So it's back up to number 25. We've been in this range 28 to 24 for quite a long time now without seeming to really break out ahead of whatever Chainlink, Tron, FTX, Uniswap, these other ones that are kind of sitting at our market cap, which is fine as far as I'm concerned, because the community is definitely doing plenty of good stuff. And I would only, I guess, be really concerned if we were just rapidly dropping down past all these other coins. But anyway, I had a good week and now is up to 119.05 BCH per BTC. So we were at those lows of 140 and now back up a little bit. So that's also good to see. How much do you follow the price, and does the volatility worry you? What's your sort of relation with that?
I don't really look at my phone, only like 5 to 10 times per day or something like that, you know. No, but it is. It's great as a medium exchange. That's the important part. But price definitely would help. I think. Yeah, no doubt about it. I've been doing a bit of training with our local Chamber of Commerce, And that's great, by the way. I think probably more of us should do that. They've been really supportive. But it just, like it's a lot for a business to start using, change to a different currency. Not that you change everything in the business, but there's, it's concerning that there's risk there. So it would be good. It's an issue, but I think it's the long game, isn't it? Like I sort of see it as inevitable. Like all the other coins are not very useful. They don't have that social acceptance, and they're not really trying. Like the communities aren't trying to actually use it in commerce, to use it for trading real goods and services. So but it was an interesting week.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative of different coins is also very interesting, and I think that's something that I encourage people who are newer to cryptocurrency, or even if you're not, it's honestly a good thing at any time, is to go dig around in some of the other crypto communities. Find out what they're up to. Go look on their Reddit boards. Go listen to, I mean, not all of them, but some of the more major ones will have kind of community-driven podcasts similar to this. Some of them won't really, which is kind of telling. They just have a more corporate news out, like the Cardano Foundation or the Solana hype marketing or whatever, right? So, but that's another thing that you can learn, right? Is which of these coins are sort of more community grassroots driven, which ones are more corporatized, which ones are doing different elements of, like, to me, it's always and forever will be cryptocurrency, peer-to-peer electronic cash. That was where it all started. That's the whole point, basically. But other communities might not agree with that, right? They don't necessarily have a strong focus on people who've read the white paper. Maybe everyone's excited about monkey NFTs for some reason, or maybe everyone's excited about FTX token because they can speculate on that and it was great, or whatever, right? And all these communities, they all have their own different flavor that you can sort of pick up on if you just read a few of their Reddit posts, ask a few questions, see kind of what the dialogue is and what the community is focused on. But one thing that becomes very obvious when you do that very quickly is how organic the BCH community is, even though it's quite small, and also how unique it is in its like sort of not passion, but its dedication to that concept. Things haven't got kind of watered down with, other sort of distractions. It is still like, I want to be able to trade you this for something. That's the whole point, right? That's money. Do you have any other favorite coins? Maybe that's a question I should ask.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's probably worth mentioning Monero because as you say, looking to communities, I think even just actually using them, like everyone has got a computer and a phone, and like Monero has been another one that I've been interested in, and I think it is good, right? It's important, but just my testing even on that, it's, it locks up your wallet. It's just not as fast and easy. So, privacy is important. And, I think probably as we move forward, BCH has got a cash fusion, so that's great. But, innovation hasn't stopped in that area. But Monero, in my experience, it's just not going to cut it for everyday normies like me, like to use. It has to be easier than, FPOS and cash and that sort of thing, where I just couldn't see buying a coffee with Monero,
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that one, because I would say it's almost like a because the communities do overlap, because anybody can be in any community and anybody can change in or out of different communities. The coins do have sort of allies in a sense, where the allies, if it was some video game or board game or something, the BCH allies would be Monero and Dash, probably the communities with the most overlap, and then the enemies, anti-aligned, would be BTC and BSV and maybe eCash, and then there would be a lot of ones that are sort of neutral, but there's a lot that are just kind of a bit negative by default because BCH has had so much slander against it. And I guess a lot of people, even if they don't particularly love Bitcoin BTC, they still feel that that's the real one, and has the clout and everything, and that BCH is just a bit of some annoying knockoff or something. So yeah, it's interesting that you say Monero. A lot of people in BCH like Monero, I think.
I think I think we've mentioned this before on the show, but I'm just looking at these numbers now and I'm like, this should be something more interesting to focus on. Our volume still puts us in fourth. And it goes Tether, then BTC, then Ethereum, then Bitcoin Cash. And BTC is half that of Tether in terms of volume, and Ethereum is half that of BTC in terms of volume. And we're just shy of half that in terms of volume against Ethereum. And and then we also have, I don't know if you guys saw, there was a Reddit post that talked about essentially the prevalence of cash fusion transactions, and it was something like 40% of all transactions in the past month have a parent element of 1 point that's a cash fusion transaction. So I think we've nailed peer-to-peer cash, right?
Well,
and
it's just an idea. Go on.
I don't think we can take away from that at this point, unless there's a chain death spiral, which seems very unlikely. And so, if we say that it's a conclusion that we've nailed peer-to-peer cash, that narrative is flex tape sealed tight. What other narratives can we build that we know we can within the next 5 years nail out and bring new users in?
Well, I guess I want to say as regards the volume part of it, it's slightly misleading. There's a little bit of an asterisk on that because it's something like 85 or maybe even 95% of the volume comes from CoinFlex if you have a look at it. Okay. And there's a lot of debate about this because it's, some people kind of say, yeah, but they're sort of faking it. And then some people say, no, they're sort of not, because the reason that they have such massive volume is they're very friendly to the BCH community. So a lot of people go there for BCH, or I'd never heard of CoinFlex until I was reading up on BCH. Oh, CoinFlex, great. So there's that aspect to it. I mean, they run the Smart BCH bridge at the moment. There's a lot of tie-ins. Mark Lamb, the CEO, is very known and trusted in the community, does a lot of great work. But the reason is they have these AMMs, these automated market makers, where essentially you can make money by putting your coins on the exchange, and they will sort of let you be the house in a certain sense, where you can set you can say, look, what's the price now? $340, right? You can say, I'm going to set between a trading range of 320 and 360, and then the CoinFlex will automatically have a bot basically that sells your coins when it hits 360 and rebuys at 320 and just sort of flicks them back and forth like that, which is great for CoinFlex because that increases the liquidity and the trading and the volume on their exchange. And it's great for you because you're essentially making part of the exchange fees that the exchange gets. Plus, you can also sort of slowly build up your stack by exploiting those small fluctuations in the market. I don't know how that works. If it goes way out of that band, maybe at some point it just kind of kills it. I've never used it myself, but they have that inbuilt into their exchange. And this is something that people can do on other exchanges, but you have to code up your own bot and you have to be pretty involved. Whereas they've sort of democratized it a bit and just made it that anybody can just use those products with a couple clicks, even if you have no idea what it is. You just know, if I put my coins here and wait a little bit, I'll make a bit of extra money. That's literally all you need to know. And so that means that they're doing tons of volume on CoinFlex, and therefore because then those bots interact as well, right? Because one of the bots is selling and another one is buying, so it gets even more volume, and then that just feeds into itself. So sometimes when they've taken CoinFlex on and off the volume listing on CoinMarketCap, and whenever they do, we drop way down. And then, so yeah, I don't think we necessarily we're kind of a bit overrepresented on that stat, but it is true that the community is punching above its weight in terms of the size of real people who are interested and excited about that coin, I would say.
Is CoinFlex unique in that it's making its exchange transactions on chain?
No, it's not making this is not on chain. This is all on the volume indicators on CoinMarketCap are aggregates from the exchange's internal data.
Okay, well, I take back everything I said. I want on-chain metrics only.
That's why we look at the cent in USD, speaking of.
Gotcha.
Well, let's just go on. So next one is the transactions. So transactions have gone up a little bit this week. They have been slowly growing. I just feel we've got a really nice little bit going here, where there was that huge run up because of noise.cash spamming everyone. Well, not spamming, but basically spamming everyone. And then they batched up all the transactions, and then things settled down at a more 40K type of range, which seemed to be about the real use once a noise cash transaction was happening once per day to people rather than 100 times per day to people. And since then, it's just been slowly building up. And I almost feel like at some point, it's going to just completely decouple from BTC as well, too. You can see as the BTC sort of rises and falls, but much more jagged, because it always happens on the weekdays. Nobody trades BTC on the weekends apparently, but BCH is a bit more organic. But there's going to be a certain point at which the community's growth engines and peer-to-peer network aspect just kicks off, and we start just trading amongst ourselves, or as we already are, basically more and more, and it just becomes irrelevant to what's happening in the rest of the crypto market, whether the price is pumping or not. So it's really good, I think, to see it just slowly creeping up there, and it's believable organic growth too. It's not just somebody has made a new app that's just spamming something over and over. How often do you make BCH transactions? That might be a good question.
No, not very frequent. I suppose I just try to buy stuff online if it's in BCH. But no, not very often. Cash Fusion. But the noise.cash is interesting, isn't it? Like I think that really just the fact that they turned it off and started batching really, to me, proves that there is an incentive to take it off chain. Like we don't. It's fine if people are willing to pay those costs, but I suppose that might be the Bitcoiners line, BTC, to say it's just spam. Well, here we've got a case where they deliberately didn't. They started batching it because I assume because there was a cost there. When you have that many transactions, it would add up. So there is an incentive there for developers to not do that on chain. To a point, hey, it's a pretty minor fee if you're buying a coffee, but if it's if you're accumulating on noise.cash in cents, amounts in cents, then it makes sense that they start batching it. Yeah, I also think that the whenever I see this comparison, I don't know how many Bitcoiners are looking at this, because you can see the bottleneck, right, of BTC. Like, what are they thinking? Like, even with Lightning, like, you want to get the masses on Lightning, and right now it looks like it's at capacity before you're talking about mass adoption. So I don't understand how they haven't just thought those things through.
Well, I'll talk about these 2 points. So on the noise cache point, I think the reason they did the batch transaction was partly because of the 1 cent fees, but I think the bigger problem that they ran into was that they were basically onboarding new users who would come in and they would get 10 1 cent tips, and then they would try and send it somewhere, and they would discover that they had a 2 or a 3 cent fee, and they would be really confused about that because it should be a low fee. But if you've got all your UTXOs are all literally just fractions of a cent or something like that, then it just turned into a big problem with people being confused. But if you just change that where they now just get credited and they get paid out when they got to $1 or 50 cents, then it's no longer a problem. So, and I thought that was, like you're saying, I thought that was really interesting because it does show BCH once again forming a nice little middle ground between BTC, which is not going to allow basically any kind of micropayments or any interesting stuff like that, especially not on chain, and then BSV, which is they are doing that, but now they're just spamming it up with God knows what. It's not real people making. Well, they would say that it was, but it's not really economic activity. Jet's loving it.
The new narrative shift is that the essentially value that is transacted between machines has more weight than value that is transacted between humans, because most of our economy is going to run on machines. So that's the next narrative shift, and it's amazing to me to watch the goalposts just go further and further down the field, making
a virtue out of necessity there, I would say. And I mean, there is some sort of element to that whole side of things where essentially what they do understand is that the block reward does have to eventually sustain the network. They've got the right idea about that, but they've also just completely overlooked the fact that there's a reason that Satoshi put in the initial coin subsidy, and that initially the market is going to be driven a lot by speculation and so on. And you just sort of have to embrace that and use that as your window to spread real adoption, rather than trying to sort of jump the gun to the end and make massive amounts of transactions on chain before either the node developers have built up enough software improvements for that, or, just to kind of essentially hide or try and FUD people out of the fact that real people that I want to buy a coffee is not choosing your chain. So instead it's like, well, what if we just have somebody who it's just weird. It's just, look, it's not supposed to be Google Drive, basically, is the simplest thing. It's Bitcoin. It's not Google Drive. We already have Google Drive. If you want that, that's something different. But as far as the capacity stuff goes, I think there's certainly an element where the narrative for BTC, there's just not a lot of good engineering in there. And I think we're going to touch on this as well later in the show, but a competent engineer does not run their system at capacity or even near capacity. You just don't do it. You don't have your server load at 85 or 90%, because the fact is, in most applications, and quite particularly in very internet heavy viral network type of things, you're going to have spikes that are going to way outcompete the current capacity, basically, right? So if you have your server capacity at 10%, I mean, nowadays you have, with Terraform and whatever, you can have auto scaling. So your stuff just automatically spins up more Amazon servers as more and more people flood into your site. So those things are starting to happen. But even setting that aside, if you just have your servers at 10%, if you grow 5x for one day because your thing goes viral, then you're loving it and you're having a great time. And there's not that much downside to having a few extra servers online. Whereas the opposite is a heavy, heavy cost. If you start to go viral and get traction and then everything crashes and millions of users miss out on the one time they were slightly interested in using your product and trying it out, and or they get a negative impression because the one time they tried it was down and it wasn't working, then you're essentially screwed. And so the BTC side is, I think they still understand that they're number one on coin market cap, and they still understand that they've got the kind of incumbent advantage. But what they don't see is the hidden cost of all the people like you or like anybody that try Bitcoin, or maybe they don't try Bitcoin increasingly these days because it's got such a bad reputation, but they try it, they do 1 or 2 transactions, and then they go somewhere else. And they just, it's like if their community is not shrinking, it's just not growing relative. And that's terrible for them, actually, because they're always spouting off about network effect and how BTC has the brand and is established and everything. But that doesn't matter if you just have, they are not at the size that it's taken over the world and everybody is transacting in BTC. So if you're not at that scale, then the network effect doesn't mean very much if other people are growing it in percentage terms faster than you, despite your network effect. Eventually that's just going to fall apart. All this time that they've spent trundling along, capped at the 300,000 or 350,000 transactions a day for the last 4 or 5 years, has just led huge innovation in all the other coins. So yeah, I think that's kind of my impression of it.
On the BSV side, I'm just looking at the growth of the blockchain. That's this is skyrocketed. I don't know if you've seen that. Have you seen that?
Yeah. It's like, the moment for the viewers. So BTC is about 350 gigabytes, I think the chain is, or a little bit more. BCH is maybe in the high 190 or I'm doing this off the top of my head, but it's about
197. Yeah.
Oh,
there you go.
Interesting. BCHD is a little heavier. I recently synced up a node and it was 215 gigs, I think.
All right. There you go. So because obviously up to the time of the split, they have the same amount. And then afterwards, BCH has been lower for most of it. So it's smaller. And then BSV, it's like 4 terabytes or 5 terabytes. And it's rocketing up faster and faster and faster. They're just spamming away their blockchain with their op return data pushing. And yeah, like that's just a disaster. I mean, if they were getting that kind of growth because the entire world was flooding in to genuinely use their blockchain, that would be what we were just talking about. The BTC would just be taking over the world. Everyone would be trading in BSV. It would be so hype, it would be killing it. But instead, they just slowly drifting further and further down the coin and market cap list as they get more desperate spam, which makes it even harder for new people to get involved or interested, because how are you going to... I mean, storage is cheap. That's the BCH line, but it's not so cheap that you can just add terabytes and terabytes with no regard for actual growth to back it up.
Yeah, I think there's I don't think we should have a permanent inflation, but if you wanted to perfectly cost everything, you would have that continuous inflation, right? Because there's a continual cost of the growth of the blockchain. On the BCH side, I think it's a pretty fair assumption, if it's real economic activity, the reward from the transaction fees, once the inflation's gone, should be enough to cover that growth. That would make sense, I think. But BSV seems like it's just taken that too far, really.
Everything in moderation, exactly. But the BTC side, interestingly, they are starting to question things. It's a bit slow off the blocks in my mind, but recently I did see some stuff by Dan Held. I was posting about in the BCH Telegram, podcast Telegram, and they are starting to sort of talk in these weird circles around, was big blocks the right move all along, or in the long run, how are we going to pay for our blockchain? Because it's clearly the lie, which was pretty obviously a lie, but some people believed it, was that, well, we're going to have high fees and therefore people will, a couple of sort of whales will pay for these fees and therefore will have enough to support. But that's just nonsense, because that would only work if BTC was the one and only cryptocurrency. If there was no competing cryptocurrencies that had cheaper fees, then that might be the case. But the fact is, given long enough, people who are paying ridiculous fees sooner or later, and usually sooner, will find an alternative. And that's what Ethereum is struggling with. That's what Bitcoin BTC is struggling with. In the case of Bitcoin BTC, it's more self-imposed. Well, perhaps they're both self-imposed, but for different reasons. And so that's just that they're kind of starting to think, wait a second, guys, this has been fine so far, but they kind of can't escape the black hole of logic, which is that originally it was peer-to-peer cash, and Satoshi chose the economic model that he did very specifically, and they were very happy to throw all that idea out the window. But as time ticks on, it's looking more and more like Satoshi was onto something. Shocker. So anyway, all right, let's do the cent in USD this week. Speaking of on-chain metrics, BTC has actually had a pretty good week. It's been up a little bit. BCH still, we've had no return of the whale. Been kind of hanging out, wondering where they went, but they seem to have vanished without the price crashing. So I guess they weren't selling them all. So that's kind of fine. And onto our first actual proper topic then. So Bitcoin 2022, which I think I mentioned on the last show, and it was I think it was the 6th to the 9th of April. So it was recently going on. It just kind of sucked, to be honest. I mean, obviously I'm not going to be the first one to be out championing, wow, Bitcoin BTC had a great conference or anything, but I will give credit where it is due. If it was exciting, if there was some cool announcements, or there was some innovation that other coins should be looking to copy or something, I would recognize it. I honestly would, but it just didn't happen. This is the biggest crypto conference in the world. There was something like 25,000 attendees. The price didn't pump at all, obviously, because people just weren't convinced that it was really happening. So it was in Miami, and the big narratives over the 3 days were Lightning Network is going to fix everything. And there was, interestingly, a lot about stable coins, because Bitcoiners are increasingly unable to actually pay for things in Bitcoin. As time has gone on, they've needed to find something else to get excited about. So it's turned out to be transacting in fiat via Lightning Network, which is what the Bitcoin Cash side predicted before and after the fork, that it would just turn into the banking system again. And that's essentially what is happening. And it's pretty transparent that that's what's going on. But there's still sort of elements of this need for a peer-to-peer cash revolution, which can be seen in the fact that the major sponsor was this app called Cash App, and they have a logo which is a green. It's a green green bee, and so everybody was just getting subconsciously like BCH vibes into their minds while they were here. And it's ludicrous on the face of it, because Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash app, electronic cash, if your sponsor at your event is an app that does cash, it's like, well, what are you doing then? That doesn't even make any sense. So I don't know. Did you watch any of the streams for this, or did you get an impression of what was going on?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I agree with what you said. That Cash App was hilarious. Seeing that logo, I feel like it's a little bit like, don't mention the war, the block size war in this case, and the term is really cash. Like you say, it's subliminal, and they're going to have to, they have to get payments working if they want it to work. And so they some of them want to help that, and some of them don't. And it's just a bit hilarious seeing it happen. I mean, I'm pretty isolated here down in Tassie. I could see a lot of value in having a physical conference where people get together. I would like that. I'd love to go to something like that. So, and a lot of the stuff, these guys, that understand the idea of inflation being bad. So I can only I can't wait till they sort of wake up and the market turns around, because I think a lot of these people that are going to this sort of conference can't see that yet. We got to welcome them when they come, and but it was interesting from what I saw. Jordan Peterson seems a little bit on the fence. I thought what he said was reasonably good. You've got here in your notes about Honduras. So Samson Mao spoke about that. Was that the Prospera thing that he said, or was, because I know Prospera was mentioned in Samson Mao, but is Honduras doing something as the whole country?
Well, that was the thing about it. So I watched some of the talks. I did watch Jordan Peterson's talk, and I agree with you on that. He was a bit lukewarm on it, and that was a bit of a theme where, because the peer-to-peer cash element has died, and because a big majority of the original sort of cypherpunk type of people have got out of there, but at the same time, Bitcoin has got a lot of clout and brand name and sort of hitting the mainstream a bit. They had a lot of speakers that was sort of a bit tangential to Bitcoin. They were just kind of there. They weren't really the crypto speakers. It was more like they had Eric Weinstein, although I didn't watch his talk. And they also had Serena Williams came in, and a couple of NFL players who were there basically to shill Cash App, which was a little bit disappointing to see, to be honest. But it showed that crypto and Bitcoin is big enough to get clout and get these sort of celebrity brand names. But it's interesting that you have someone like Jordan come in, and he can sort of see that there's something going on here. But when those people come in, they usually emphasize the real economy part of it. They're not as interested in, the price speculation or we're all getting rich. They don't really jive with that. But he can sort of see, it's good that we've got an alternative system. I'm glad you guys are trying it. But he also didn't come in with the review of, wow, this is incredible. Every vendor is accepting Bitcoin. And, they're just clearly not getting the sense on the ground that this is the revolution. So he did have, I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and he did actually have a pretty interesting talk. I do recommend. It was different to what he usually talks about as well, too. The interviewer actually did a good job of asking him about entrepreneurialism and how, because he's an academic who typically are not that interested in entrepreneurialism, it's very atypical for him to be so excited about it, and how crypto has always been sort of entrepreneurial. So it was actually a good talk. But it was just very telling to me that these sort of celebrity attendees who were kind of like, well, it's a cool idea to have a separate economy, but they clearly weren't super sold on it, even as they were right in the mecca of everything. And then as far as Samson Mao goes, that was another aspect that the conference just didn't deliver on, which was that he was on Twitter beforehand hyping up, guys, I'm going to be giving some face melting announcements. It's going to change the world. It's going to be huge. But of course, at the end of the day, it was a bit of a lame duck, where I don't even know specifically what I'm not going to bother watching his talk, but I had a bit of a look afterwards. He sort of announced that a couple of these other sort of nations, smaller geographic areas, were going to look into Bitcoin a bit. There was something about Mexico was maybe going to do some legal tender laws, but it wasn't really that locked in or solid. There was something about Honduras maybe going to be involved. But the thing is, they can't even get it right in El Salvador. And Bukele himself didn't show up, even though he was supposed to be one of the big speakers. I don't know what he was going to say, because it would have been probably a bit hollow after last year. It was, guys, we're taking Bitcoin and the Bitcoin city and everything. As far as I know, they don't have that much substance to really report that it's taken off. I mean, maybe they would have some numbers that they could bring up, but certainly the independent reviewers have not found there to be incredible adoption in El Salvador. So he didn't even turn up because his country was busy with gang violence, which not another great endorsement for the free and open economy happening there either. And yeah, this Honduras
protesting Bitcoin.
Exactly.
That was the violence. That was the violence.
It wasn't that. It was just separate, like a murder spree by their actual criminally, organized. But that's right. There has also, separate to that, there's also been Bitcoin protesting. There's just been problem after problem after problem. And if you just look behind the veil, even the slightest bit, it's just not been convincing. And yeah, Samson was out there telling everyone how he was going to have these awesome announcements, and so were a lot of people. So was Jack Mallers and whatever. But from my observation of the Twitter feeds and the streams and everything, everybody was hoping for some big, exciting announcements like El Salvador last year, and it just didn't arrive. It was like we're still working on trying to make Lightning payments work. And
I know with the Prospera. So that's a ZETI. It's like a economic zone, special zone in Honduras.
Oh, maybe that was.
And I did see Joel Baumgar. He's the president or CEO of that company. It seems like a really good thing that those guys are doing, and I know you can pay, but with BTC your fees for that. So it's like it's like a private city is the idea, is what they want to start. And he was there. I know he's a BTC fan. Great guy, Joel. But just onto Bitcoin. But I do know they also they're fairly agnostic with setting up it's just businesses in cryptocurrency in general. They're far from Bitcoin only at Prospera. So he was there and at the Bitcoin conference, but it wasn't even maximalism,
Well, that's it. Everybody's just slowly, there's only so much hype you can have. And that was another little sub-narrative that emerged out of the conference, is just this disaster that is just so predictable of online toxicity. It just doesn't translate in real life. And it's just amazing to see where online, there's all this, screw the other shitcoiners and da. But it's very hard at a crypto meetup to say to somebody, you're a shitcoiner, because even at this literal conference, which was the peak of it all, it's still in face to face with someone. They're just going to be like, why are you just a rude, impolite person? They're just not going to react well. And you're going to suffer the immediate social repercussions of everyone kind of looking at you like, what are you doing? So they had this kind of panel with a few people on it who were sort of commenting and stuff. And some of them said some stuff like, all these shitcoiners, or maybe they didn't even go that far. I think there was definitely some of that, but there's kind of more BC Maxi type vibe. But then they had this amazing panel where one of the guys on stage said, all right, no judgment, but I just got these two questions that I want to ask. So the first question is, who here doesn't own Bitcoin? And it was like maybe a couple people raised their hands, but not really that many, right? And then the second question was, who here owns Ethereum? And it was like 60% of the audience or something like that. And the guy on the stage, and the people on the stage who were a bit more in the inner circle bubble were like shocked. It was like, what is going on? And somebody made a sort of half-hearted joke along the lines of, is this the Bitcoin conference? What are we doing here? And there was certain takes on Twitter of people being like, why is there so many shitcoiners at our Bitcoin conference? It's just reality was just flooding in on this little echo chamber, that the reality is most people are sort of pretty agnostic about what coins they like, and face to face in real scenarios you can't be. So negative and dismissive of all the exciting things or the projects or the utility or whatever has got people fired up. So it really does seem to just be coming apart at the seams a little bit in all those regards.
Having said that, I think I said at the beginning that I originally, when I got into BTC and I saw the Coinbase listing, it just confused me to see different cryptocurrencies, and I thought that's silly. But you can imagine easily when there's flippening, whatever coin that is, but probably BCH. There's no reason to desire like lots of cryptocurrencies. I would imagine you'd see a consolidation, and people would prefer, just because of economic activity. Like, it's a hassle to have to trade from different currencies all the time. So we don't need this toxic masculinity to what is it?
Maximalism.
Now I can't say it. Maximalism. Yeah, I said it wrong. To consolidate the market. The market will do that on its own, because it's just a hassle, Yeah. Yep. Good.
It was certainly interesting. So I think two more final points, or maybe three more final points, if I can keep them all in my brain. So on the slide, I've got a picture of the Bitcoin BTC bull. So this was honestly the most hyped thing of the whole conference. Was they've made a kind of statue thing of a Bitcoin. It's like a cyber bull, basically, which is kind of a reference to the Wall Street bull that is famously on Wall Street. It's sort of in a pretty similar pose, but it's in black and gold, and it's got the kind of Tron style plating and everything like that. But a lot of people were making fun of the fact that it's got no balls, unlike the Wall Street bull. So there was a lot of jokes about that, bit of a sign of the times there too. And it sort of does make sense with the whole cyber element, but then it also means it just kind of doesn't have that kick to it, really. And then the one thing that I saw that somebody did say who went was that the businesses that are thriving in this environment of the ones that were sort of presenting and had stalls and so on and so forth, was exchanges, wallets, and miners are the ones who are kind of making it happen. And that's actually amazing news for BCH in particular, because both exchanges, firstly, are generally not aligned to any coin because they don't care which one wins. They're going to win however it works out. And then wallets and miners, particularly miners, but also wallets, are going to be a bit more chain agnostic. So if all this money and excitement and whatever is going on with those businesses, if they're succeeding, that's great, because if BCH starts rising up the ranks, well, it's pretty easy for them to just defect and change sides, right? If there was Lightning Network payments, even that we could still sort of co-opt, I think. But if it was something very BTC specific that was thriving, then that would be less good for BCH specifically, but all other cryptos. But I think it's just very telling that the chain agnostic businesses are the ones that are doing well and finding success, rather than the chain specific ones.
Can I hop in here real quick?
Yeah, jump in. What was your thoughts? How much of the conference did you watch?
I watched maybe a total of 30 seconds. I was like, this is too much for me. But I didn't fact check this. This might be complete and utter garbage, but I saw Bukele share a thing on his Twitter that was saying that some US institution was looking into what they were doing with Bitcoin and they considered it a threat. And I'm wondering if that was part of the reason why he didn't attend the conference. Like, he doesn't want to go to the States because he doesn't want to risk getting
Department of Justice showing up to just wreck him.
Yeah,
could have been.
definitely
could have been.
And on your point, Duncan, I've mentioned this before. I think I mentioned this once on the podcast. I think Bitcoin specifically, I always view as like this fractal. And so if Satoshi can come back and spend on your chain, it's still valid as Bitcoin. But eventually that fractal, while it does expand, will reconsolidate. And it'll be the death spirals that are the action of that consolidation. I don't know, it might be a completely incorrect, kind of model for things too. And I don't think anyone can predict how that's going to go, but I think it's been useful to be like, that first concept of if Satoshi can come back and spend on your chain, and it still uses the same SHA-256 algorithm, it's Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would be one interesting thing is that we haven't seen anybody try and do anything radically different. Like nobody has said we're going to be the inflation Bitcoin fork. Nobody's really tried that. Or we're going to be, I don't know what might be another thing. Like there's only a couple of very core tenets to Bitcoin. You couldn't really say we're the closed source Bitcoin. That wouldn't really work. Or the company sponsored Bitcoin is really already BSV. But there's different an inflation focused Bitcoin might be an interesting one, but there's just been no desire for it. People have just done that on other chains instead. Or the EVM compatible Bitcoin. Well, that's us. So I don't know. A lot of things are finding their way into one of the forks, I guess, somewhere or another. And I want to also just wrap up this segment by saying that probably next year, I don't know if I'm going to even do a segment on the conference unless it turns out to be super hype. If the trend downwards continues, it'll just be pretty irrelevant, I think, by next year. Last year, it was a bit of a joke, and there was the El Salvador news, and Max Kaiser was on stage screaming to the cultish crowd. And then this year, there was just not that much energy or excitement. There was a lot of talking around stable coins, and they're just behind the times. It's the biggest event, but that doesn't mean it's where the most action is. It just means it's where most of the sort of newest entrants and most of the people who are just dabbling seem to be at. So I don't know. We'll see. I definitely don't want to eat my words next year. If wow, it's kicking off and it turns out to be a big thing, but I
Will
can just
Smith
see a
shows
scenario
up and
where
starts punching people in the face.
could be somebody mixing it up. Maybe him and Bukele are both a bit worried about the Department of Justice. So you never know. You never know how people end up being in the same category. But anyway, next slide. The most interesting thing that came out of the conference was somehow, and I still have no explanation for this, the conference started and immediately major news publications, CNBC, Forbes, and NASDAQ all published what is the difference between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash articles, including CNBC tweeting it out to their more than 1 million followers. And this just caught me totally off guard. I had no idea what this was about. Why would it just suddenly be that at the Bitcoin conference, either they thought that everybody needed to know this or them. And it almost seemed a bit coordinated. It was just so bizarre because BCH usually is so off the radar and so unmentioned. Why of all times during the Bitcoin conference would this suddenly become a thing? And it wasn't even inaccurate. They weren't perfect, but the articles were much more sort of fair and reasonable and balanced than we've tended to see in the past, specifically by non-crypto type of observers. Do you have any theory? What happened here?
Slow news year, maybe. You have to report on something if you're a news agency. So what news has there been in BTC, I guess? But that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, Jet, any ideas, Jet?
Yeah, they looked at that conference and they had the exact same assessment as you. And they were like, this is boring. I bet you these guys, willing to go out on a limb and take this risk can throw a better conference than this. So let's hype it up. Maybe next year they'll have the funds to throw their own and we could go report on that one.
Yeah. Maybe they're just planning ahead a little bit. I don't know. It was just very, very bizarre because usually one of these articles coming out would be unusual for BCH, and it was just unbelievable that there was 3 of them from major publications all at the exact time of the Bitcoin conference. But yeah, I love to see it, and maybe it shows that the winds are changing a little bit. The narrative is slowly starting to shift as people have realized Bitcoin BTC is not it. They just haven't capitalized peer-to-peer cash. It's not happening. Or separate economy, it's not happening.
It's like we only need to just be here. Hey, like it's not like we have to be doing an amazing conference. If we just be here, we have a separate economy so that we're around in 2-5 years when people get sick of the BTC fees and that. It's inevitable. People will just swap.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's something that people undervalue. I always see it as it's like a marathon. There's just in any marathon races, there's somebody who's just sitting in the middle or towards the back of the pack, and they're just there kilometer after kilometer after kilometer after kilometer. And then just when they see their opportunity, bam, straight out of the gates. But it's all about, if you've fallen way off the pace and you're not keeping up with the times, well, then you're out of the picture. But if you're just still in the race and just quietly there, you just slowly become more and more unignorable as other coins drop off. Like the current wave of coins that is hype, at some point they're going to have a bit of a retraction and things are going to be a bit tougher for them. And a lot of them will fade away. They'll go bust. The communities will disintegrate. They won't be able to compete with the next flashiest and greatest round of seed fund investors or whatever it is. But BCH is not like that. It has a real community. It has real history. It has staying power. So yeah, that's it. All we need to do is stay relevant. I mean, it helps the better our job we do. I'm not saying we should slack off. We should be working hard. But on the other hand, just time will clean a lot of the junk out of the way, and it's slowly just pricking the bubble of Bitcoin BTC too. So
Forbes is owned by a majority Chinese company. I'm just wondering, like, the back end to all of this, was it like a top down, okay, send this to our publications, and it like there's, I don't know, some meeting between CNBC, Forbes, and NASDAQ, or if these people...
I think the NASDAQ article was the same one that was on Forbes. I think they do have some sort of content sharing deal. So as far as I'm aware, they were the same. The CNBC one was different, though. It was substantially different. Didn't seem like it had been rehashed.
So CNBC is owned by NBC, which is owned by Comcast, which is owned by Xfinity, and I have no idea who owns that. So I'm going down the rabbit hole, but nothing yet. I'll see if I can find something that makes sense of this.
Live investigative journalism. All right, next slide then. So we've had this related, semi-related story that happened after the conference, which is Elon Musk, the Maverick, has started his 2022 campaign in the world. He's been a bit quiet for a couple of months, and definitely towards the end of last year. But the first thing he did was he's bought 9.2% of Twitter after a couple of weeks of tweeting to everyone, do we have free speech on Twitter, basically? And the majority of people saying, no, we don't. So he's decided that the world needs fixing in terms of its dialogue, especially with the prevalence of narrative control on social media these days. So he went and bought 9.2% of Twitter. The board of Twitter then offered him a seat on the board with the condition that it would cap his shares at about 14%. So he couldn't just keep buying up more and more until he kind of had control. So he rejected that offer in a bit of an about face. I don't know whether initially he was planning to go for it or not, but I guess that condition was not working out for him. And he's then put in an offer to buy all of Twitter and make it his own private company at 54.20 a share. So he's got the nice troll 420 in there, which is a 38% premium to the current market price. And this put the Twitter board in a bit of a state, because it sounds like a large amount of the Twitter employees, or certainly a non-insignificant minority, maybe, I don't know, don't really want this, because they don't really agree with Elon's political stance for free speech, basically. And so they don't really want to have him in there. And the board are a bit upset about all of this, but they're in a weird spot, because if they reject the offer, they will potentially be liable for failing their fiduciary duty to the shareholders, in that by being on the board of a large company, you have a financial and a legal obligation to look out for the financial interests of the shareholders. So turning down such a huge premium would be a bad move in that regard. And so potentially if they do that, Elon can then just sue them, or the shareholders can sue them. I guess Elon is the biggest, well, he's not even the biggest shareholder anymore. He was briefly, and then somebody else has bought up to 10%, Vanguard.
Oh, okay.
Because they've been trying to sort of wrest back control from him. So anyway, he made this move. He's made this offer, and it seems obviously, yeah. So they were in a tough spot, because either they could let him buy them out, in which case he was probably going to fire most of the board members, or they can turn down his offer and then probably just get sued and end up getting fired anyway. But it seems their response, and I don't know all the details of this, so I have to say I'm not the expert on this, but it seems that they've instead adopted this strategy of a poison pill, which is kind of this idea, it's sort of a bit of a scorched earth approach, where the idea is, look, we'll sort of cut off our own nose to spite our face, because Elon's got them in this bind. So they're implementing this strategy that has apparently not been used very often, because hostile corporate buyouts like this are not as common as they used to be. But back when they were, people had this strategy, which was basically they're putting out more shares at a lower price that they're offering to their existing investors. So the plan is that if somebody like Vanguard or these other ones who are more on side with them buys up these new shares, then indirectly that dilutes Elon's shares, right? So it's a way to kind of keep him out of the picture. And I mean, it must be legal and everything, because I'm sure this is highly scrutinized, but it's a bit of a underhanded play. It's a bit weird too. I mean, it seems a bit weird that they can just not, prejudice against Elon, basically, even though he is the biggest shareholder. So I mean, we'll wait and see how it plays out, but this is a pretty big drama, I'd say, because it's so bizarre that free speech has become such a controversial and such a maligned topic, that all the people who are screaming and crying about this are upset that billionaires are taking over our media, when it's like billionaires they already have. What do you mean? Every other one is owned by these big there was this classic meme going around about the Washington Post publishing this thing. Oh, we shouldn't have billionaires in control of our media. It's like, you're owned by Jeff Bezos, right? Literally the second richest guy in the world. So bit of the pot calling the kettle black here. And so apparently it's just a case that if the wrong billionaire starts playing around in the media space, then everybody's upset that their echo chamber is threatened. But of course, it also has a weird dynamic, because Elon is one of the most active and biggest posters on Twitter. I think he's about the 5th or 6th biggest account, and most of the ones above him are relatively inactive. It's Obama and Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber, I think. Maybe Donald Trump before he got banned. So Elon's not only super popular, but a lot of Twitter actually supports him in this move. So it's a weird internal revolt of sort of the employees and some of the posters on one side versus Elon, the somewhat large shareholder, and some of the Twitter users on the other side. So yeah, what's your take on all this drama?
I mean, personally, I'm not on Twitter. Like, it's just a bit not my thing. Like, it's a bit of an echo chamber. But the exception is Elon. Like, he's awesome. Like, yeah, just sort of enjoying the show, enjoying the headlines and reading what he's doing. It's a lot of money, hey. Like, and if he's willing to do that, then yeah, buy you know, at least partially out, and then if he's fully buy it all out, that's amazing. I wouldn't do it. You know, I think you know, start something else up parallel with it, but it is really hard to get that network effect. So I'm just really enjoying the show, really. Yeah.
I mean, we could see it that might be the alternative move. I mean, we'll follow this up on the next show or whatever. Is that if it doesn't work out for Elon, well, he can just take all that money that he would have used to buy Twitter and instead start a competitor. He would instantly have a huge following, I guess, depending on how heavy he wanted to go on doing it. But especially if he did something like he teamed up with Trump or, you know, a couple other of the bigger people who got banned off Twitter and said, all right, we're doing the ElonMusk version, and then got a few of them on there to build up a bit more of an interested following as well too, plus himself, obviously. You know, maybe it would fly. I'd open an account instantly. I can say that for sure. So, you know, we'll wait and see how it plays out, but it's certainly relevant in the larger context of the cryptocurrency ecosystem, because there's so much of a focus on all these debates around free speech and around narrative control, and even for Bitcoin Cash specifically, because it has been a bit maligned by Twitter. Twitter is famously, they have crypto Twitter is this kind of whole community, and a lot of the crypto influencers and stuff, they all love their Twitter, right? But Bitcoin Cash is a bit underrepresented in that regard, and it doesn't have a topic on Twitter. Like it's very rarely trends and stuff, because it's basically subcategorized under Bitcoin, and this seems to be like deliberate, right? That it's not been given its own little section, because if it did, it would be more easy for people to link up. So instead, it's just been slowly infiltrating. So sometimes the algorithm will suggest to you, oh, Bitcoin, and then it'll be somebody saying, but Bitcoin sucks, use Bitcoin Cash. And yeah, it's just a bit of a weird dynamic. So if Elon was suddenly in charge and he was open sourcing the algorithm or tweaking things around in there, it might actually be a benefit to the BCH community. But anyway, right after all this drama, or in the middle of all this drama about that, Elon also started up again on his big blocks narrative hype, where Toshi Nakamoto, who is one of the accounts that Elon follows and will reply to, who's one of the creators of Dogecoin, said, I would guess the infrastructure of the web has improved enough in 8 years to experiment with speeding it up, meaning the block sizes and the block intervals as well too. And Elon said, exactly, block size and time should keep pace with the rest of the internet, which is essentially just common sense. Like, you have to be a nitwit not to understand that things like the exact amount of change is certainly open to debate and whatever, but the fact that technology is getting better is not really in dispute. And so, you know, just like saying if Facebook put a cap on their website that it couldn't load any faster than it did in 2007, which has been nonsense. So that, you know, that's just pretty obviously the way to go. But it was interesting to see him once again reaffirming that. And I've got a a little line here as well from Peter McCormack, who replied, "No, block time should maintain pace with lowest tech/bandwidth options, as Bitcoin is money for all. For speed of light transaction throughput, there is the Lightning Network. The best Bitcoin engineers have already figured this out. They would talk to you, just ask." And I just couldn't believe the lack of self-awareness here, right? That Peter McCormack is this guy who he will say, I'm not an engineer, right? He will very avowedly, he repeatedly calls himself a moron on his own show, which is just part of his shtick, really. But the point is that he knows that he's not an engineer, and he is talking to one of the most famous, if not the most famous engineer in the world. And he seemingly doesn't understand that being an engineer means that Elon doesn't have to talk to anybody. He can just read the white paper and the code if he needs to and figure it out himself. He doesn't need to talk to these best Bitcoin engineers who are this sort of priest class in Bitcoin BTC that dictate from on high that 1 megabyte is the perfect, religiously decided amount, when he thinks they're the best Bitcoin engineers because they're the ones that have not been kicked out because of censorship, not because they're actually the best engineers. But he doesn't know that. So yeah, all very bizarre. Any thoughts on that aspect of it?
No. I mean, I don't really see a need for the block time to change. But I guess that's because BCH does, instant transactions anyway. So, and there's proofs there. So, but I guess that's probably where he's coming from. He thinks that they're not confirmed, so it's not going to be as useful. Yeah,
that's it. Well, I mean, we'll see how this plays out, but I just had to touch on this in the middle of all this Twitter drama because there's just a constantly building history of Elon kind of being like, big blocks is the way, guys.
Close,
pretty obvious, He just hasn't said Bitcoin Cash yet for who knows why, but it's got to happen eventually. When is he just? It is the one thing. It's the canonical. We are the big blockers. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Just
what would you say? Yeah. What would you say for the Bitcoiners what would you say to them when they say, but we need it to be a static, set in stone, because if we can change the rules, one day we might have someone change the increase inflation or something like that. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that essentially the argument against changing the limit is, it's kind of in two elements. So the sort of the first component, the second component is the immutability. So I'll come back to that. The first component is about what Peter is sort of touching on here. Block time should maintain pace with lowest tech/bandwidth options. I mean, that's basically FUD because it's not maintaining pace with anything. It hasn't changed in 10 years, right? So it's definitely not doing that. But the idea of, we're going to centralize all our nodes. I've talked about this on the show before, but it is undoubtedly true that, for instance, raising the block size from 1 megabyte to 2 megabytes would decrease the number of node, like it would raise the minimum node hardware requirements. That's just a fact. But it's also true that because technology gets better over time, it might be relatively the same as it was, a few years ago. And on top of that, it is not the intended configuration of Bitcoin for every user to run a node. That's not how it's supposed to work. Never was and never will be. The white paper itself has simplified payment verification, explained very clearly that end users do not need to run a node. Who needs to run a node? The miners, because that's the whole point of them being incentivized by the block reward and the transaction fees. Anybody, businesses who want to verify payments securely because they are running a business so they can afford, a couple $100 to run a node is nothing to them. And obviously hobbyists who are very keen, and if they're keen and they're techie, they're in for it. That if you've got large Bitcoin net worth holders, if you've got a couple million sitting in Bitcoin, then the price of running a node just to make sure, the rest of your investment isn't gone is well worth it, right? There's all these people who should be developers as well, who obviously need to do it to build and develop software. There's all these people who actually need to and are incentivized to run nodes, and they're the ones to do it. It's not your grandma on a dial-up connection or someone in a rural part of like Tasmania perhaps doesn't have the world's best internet, right? Like, it's not going to be people in those areas running nodes and the trade-off of trying to support those people who aren't really going to run nodes anyway is huge in terms of the ability for the network to scale, the economic utility of having low fees, the censorship resistance. You need to have enough nodes to have censorship resistance, but once you've got more than that, it's kind of irrelevant. If I told the Bitcoin BTC people I can destroy one of your nodes and double the adoption, that would be an obvious trade to make, right? But this religion around 1 megabyte allows no subtlety of that scale. So yeah, that's one aspect to it. That's kind of the more common angle. And the second angle is this immutability aspect that, there's sort of this idea, which is important, of Schelling points, which is that if, for instance, I said to you, if I take away like $1 from you, does it make you poor? And you would say no. And so I take that dollar and then I say, well, I'm going to take another dollar and another dollar and another dollar, right? It's like a thin end of the wedge type of argument. Eventually, a small amount of change can become a big problem. And it's that same idea in Bitcoin, that if you compromise your culture as to we're going to raise the block size limit, well, then maybe we'll just end up like BSV with our 4 terabyte blocks full of spam, right? And they're not entirely wrong about that idea. It's also reinforced heavily by the Bitcoin narrative that that they are like gold. Basically, that analogy has just sunk in there so much. And one of the key properties of gold is that it's been the same for millennia. So because they see that as the selling point, that's one thing that they just definitely don't want to tamper with. And it's interesting that they haven't, it's kind of come full circle, because the BSV people are obsessed with turning it back to version 0.1 and ossifying it. And the BTC people are sort of doing the same thing, but they're kind of like, no, but let's put in Taproot and let's some things just suddenly get accepted from this. But the general idea that we're just going to basically not change anything, and the fact that it's stable and predictable is necessary to have billions of dollars of or trillions of dollars of value continue to flood into it, is not necessarily wrong. You do want your network to demonstrate that it's reliable and it has, that you're not going to just screw up everyone's investment, because people have a lot of money at stake. But clearly Ethereum is far more innovative and changing things around. They also have plenty of value, not enough to flip BTC yet, but they are accumulating value. They are catching up in that race. So I think it's really just a question of drawing fine lines. Like, I'm not worried that the BCH community is going to say we need to raise the 21 million limit, because I think that's baked in and everyone understands we're just not doing that. And so I think it's definitely possible to understand that you can have a moderated approach to block size increases without throwing out any ability for the community to have principles on it. Like, the BCH community is not going to change away from SHA-256. They're not going to change to proof of stake. There's a lot of things they're not going to do, and I'm not worried about. And just this one thing just doesn't need to be the hill that you die on, basically. Does that answer it?
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I think it's worth asking those questions. I don't sort of doubt any of that, but I suppose broadly speaking, I just think the community, it is a community. It's not a company. So
exactly, yeah.
The users, the community have social pressure. There's no reason, there's no incentive they're going to want to have inflation. So I don't find that a convincing argument that would ever happen. I also, John from Bitcoin Out Loud, I don't know if you've heard.
Oh, John Moriarty,
Yeah, I don't know if you heard what he once said. He reckoned we could have no replay protection with forks. So if someone did fork off, I mean, they have to choose not to have replay protection, but you can effectively transact on multiple chains at the same time and just see what happens, see what the market chooses in a very invisible way. That's a weird concept, but
yeah, it is. I mean, I'm not. I would probably need to read up a little bit more on that, because that gets very finicky, the dynamics of that. But there was essentially, this idea that some people are or were, or maybe in the future will be, in favor of that. In a scenario where your chain splits into two, you could, BCH implemented this thing, replay protection, where if you made a transaction on BCH, it wouldn't be valid on BTC. And I think, but when BSV forked, I think they inherited the same thing. So they were not able to broadcast across both chains, as far as I'm aware. But I might be wrong on that. Anyway, the point was that you can sort of force the issue a bit. If you don't implement replay protection, things turn into a bit of a mess, because people are transacting on one side or the other side, and then these coins that they may or may not know that they've had, that they may or may not have split correctly, that they may or may not have intended, are being transacted onto different chains. But I guess the idea is, if you have all that, that raises the incentive to figure it out pretty quickly, because otherwise you're just throwing away loads of money if you're just doing it without being unaware of what's going on. And that would force, like the way it worked out, a lot of BTC people were just unaware of their BCH coins, or never bothered to move them or do anything with them, or lost them somehow or another. But if they had been having, them getting sent off into the ether unexpectedly, well, that would have definitely changed the market dynamics, I think. All right, cool. Next slide. What do we got next? We got... Oh, yeah. Okay, all right. And this was just some stuff about the poison pill, and Elon just saying that basically he had them in this position where if they screwed up their fiduciary duties, they would be legally liable. So, yeah, but it is pretty scary, basically, that this is the extent to which people will go to preserve their censorship narrative. Okay,
I just love how he's very he's just open, isn't he? Like, he's talking about billion-dollar transactions, but he's just
I'm sorry for skipping ahead
doing
here.
in public.
My keyboard has decided to disconnect. Give me 1 second.
Oh. All right. Well, anyway, we can start off on the next topic anyway. So the next topic is the addictive cost of technology. So this is why you're on the show. So you wrote this article which was explaining, well, I'll let you explain, but you wrote an article about the dynamics of Bitcoin and how the economy is supposed to work, and how that implements in the broader market. So yeah, maybe give your introduction rather than me summarizing it.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the addictive cost of technology, it doesn't make a lot of sense, that title, but I did on purpose pick that because the community that I'm in, my wife homeschools our kids. We're in a rural community, so there's just a lot of skepticism towards technology in general. And I'm sure you've met people like that. They just want it to go be like the good old days. So I just sort of learning more on economics during the years, I just noticed this pattern and just really wanted to articulate it in layman's terms. So you guys probably have heard about the Austrian School of Economics, and it's that sort of thinking that Bitcoin has come out of, that which is to favor sound money, having non-inflationary money being a good thing. And so, but then on the other side, so all my essay was, and it's pictured in that graph really simply, is just that the reason why the Austrians are right in sound money being a good thing, but the neoclassical economists being right that we're not seeing CPI rise. So that there's often a lot of arguing between those two camps, is just simply that technology is negating the cost of that inflation. So if we didn't have millions, billions of people, Jeremy, you're in software, if the software that you're writing for your company ultimately in some way would be reducing cost in efficiencies, better efficiencies. And, over the last 50, 100 years, we are, everyone's needing to use computers at work. We're using email, that's saving time, all those things on a large scale are reducing costs. And, most people think that's good. It's good for things to run efficiently. But on the other side of things, it just seems sad when the supermarket puts in a self-service checkout and they have to lay off all their workers. What's the answer to that from a moral perspective? And, there's skepticism in my community, and sometimes, I've felt that as well, is, reject technology. And, I'm not opposed to people reducing technology in their life. It can be a good thing in itself. But I just wrote this because I wanted people to realize, well, don't get angry at all these people at their work trying to be efficient, trying to do the right thing. We really need to look at sound money or honest money or something like that. That ultimately is what's going to benefit everyone, whether you're, I say in the essay, an organic, loving hippie, that just wants to raise cows, that sort of thing. You can do that. You can have the affordability of having a pantry full of, pure organic food. It'll cost you more, but because you wouldn't have that rising cost. What we're seeing a lot more in the last few months. But on the other side, like others that are quite fine with the technology that can keep the pace, they're going to enjoy, reduced costs. So it really just was about trying to encourage people to look at the right, where the problem was. So yeah, I enjoyed doing it. I did the essay, just self-published it on my blog. And then I did a video reading it out after that. Made it a little bit more visual. I mentioned it in cryptocurrency back then when I wrote it, but I hadn't used it at all. But
really?
I saw that was, a good solution. I had seen it in the news and understood Satoshi that it had sort of this Austrian school heritage, I suppose, a pushback against central banking. So I sort of mentioned it in passing as a solution. So it really was, for me, that was the start of that journey. And but it wasn't a few years, I suppose, before I actually thought, well, I should just try this Bitcoin thing, and if it really is, if it really can be a solution. I tried BTC for a bit, and to just, on my laptop, using it, and that was fine. But it wasn't until I saw Bitcoin Cash and just saw what the community was doing, how much they were just getting out, and talking to people and doing real world things, and saw the heritage there that a lot of these community members had before the block size wars. It seemed like it was that same spirit that it was really, I suppose, it gave me a lot of hope. Like, here's a solution that you can work towards. You don't just have to write this essay and think it might happen in theory, but it was a real practical thing, which was really good. It was enjoyable, I suppose. And I don't do a hard sell with any of that. I mentioned before, I'm now talking with the Chamber of Commerce just in my town, and that's actually been pretty. It was well received. So I've done one talk, and we're going to potentially open up soon to the wider community. And I'm not trying to make it like a real shill for this coin. I use Bitcoin Cash because it works, but I suppose making it as a training exercise, because it's really easy, isn't it? But it's just that first step, I think, is scary, and it doesn't make it any better when there's so many scams around. Yeah, so that's pretty much how I did it.
Yeah. So this, for the audio listeners, I just want to describe this graph, which I think, a picture tells 1,000 words. It certainly drove the point home, I would say, for me. So you've got a graph here of a long-term Australian CPI and M3 money supply comparison. So if you imagine, you've got the red line, which is the amount of money, which is the sort of hockey stick graph, just quickly ramping up, because all governments, but the Australian government is one of the worst offenders of this, are just churning out so much money to everyone that it's just ridiculous. Like, everybody's money is getting diluted, and it all floods around the economy, and then prices rise. So there's that aspect. And then you have CPI, which is the blue line, which is sort of going along, and they start kind of together, but they diverge as the red line rockets up and to the right. The blue line is rising, but it's much, much slower. It's more sort of a small linear increase. So what is going on, in the divergence there is you've done this yellow triangle, which you've labeled technology is absorbing some or much of this cost, which makes sense, because that's what you're saying about the economists arguing about it, is so much money has been printed out. Like, you can say the price of, the amount of US dollars or whatever has been, doubled or tripled or quadrupled over the last few years, basically, and the same in Australia. So why aren't prices are higher, but they're not twice as high, or they're not, 4 times as high or something? So what gives? Well, partly a lot of that fresh cash just sits in the banks. It doesn't necessarily go into circulation. And then also partly there's a bit of a lag, because once the money gets out and around, it takes a little while for people to realize, oh, money is worth less, and adjust their prices upwards. But it's a very well-made point that at this technology and economic improvement is essentially offsetting the rise in prices. You are getting, like, if there was no money printing, then the technology improvements would mean that prices would drop, which would actually be a great thing for consumers. But that's kind of the Austrian side of the picture, and it is an interesting idea, especially in the light of, I think, that as the money supply is going exponential, perhaps our technology growth is doing the same thing, right? Technology is getting more and more integrated, and this kind of story that the GDP grows 2 or 3% per year, and that's about the rate, doesn't really seem to me to hold a lot of weight. And perhaps this explains some of that. And I think we're in a world now where inflation is getting more and more and more mainstream, more and more. Like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, Bitcoiners were screaming about inflation, and everybody was like, yeah, the price goes up once in a while, but my wages go up a bit, what of it? but it's now getting to the point where inflation, despite these, is outpacing even these technological improvements, and people are starting to clue in and wonder what is going on here, and it's not happening in some far off country. I mean, it's ridiculous to say that, right? But for people from the point of view of Australia or America, if you tell them a story about Lebanon or about Turkey or about Argentina, they can just block that out, and that's happening somewhere else. I don't really care about that, right? But now it's starting to happen all over the place, including the more historically stable countries like Australia and like the US. So people are waking up to this stuff, and it is proving the case for cryptocurrency, just very slowly and painfully in some respects, but it is getting the job done. Are you seeing a lot of inflation in Australia? Are you noticing that, or are you noticing people on the ground getting more worried about it?
Yeah, I think so. My wife just going to the grocery, she's talking about it, and shortages. Hey, people haven't sort of linked those two together, I think, like just having shortages of stuff. I did hear once a testimony from a guy, I think he was Ukrainian. I think they must have gone through hyperinflation. And yeah, he just described when he went through it, it was always something else, like the problems that happened in supply chains. There was always another reason of what caused that. And that's what I've sort of experiencing and experiences at going to the grocery shop. There's shortages, and then I'm going to work and for manufacturer, and they're having supply chain issues. So it sounds a lot like what he's describing. Just on this essay, this is a really interesting thing that, like, when I started it, I thought, I'm just a commoner, I'm just a normie. Surely someone has thought of this. And I was just dumbfounded when I went to the RBA website, and there's a small little part in when they're describing inflation. And they say this, for some types of quality change, it's doubtful if any accurate measure of the change can be calculated. So this is when they're trying to calculate CPI, which is important for their stakeholders, the Australians. For example, in the case of services, consider changes in medical operating procedures, e.g. keyhole surgery, that involves less pain and a speedier recovery, or education services making a greater use of computers. And their solution, in these cases, generally no quality adjustment are applied. So they basically don't worry about it. So
very Australian.
That's the answer. That's the government's answer for this problem that we have here. We just don't calculate it. We don't see that in CPI, the rising cost of living. So.
Yeah, and it's just bizarre because it's another scenario where the government's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, honestly, because if they do this in the US, which is they do hedonic adjustments where they're trying to sort of factor that in, right? That, okay, well, today it costs $100 to, go to a concert. Concert's not a good example, but today a surgery costs, $100 to get whatever, your broken arm fixed or something. But then in a year, it still costs $100 to get your arm fixed. But in the meantime, humanity has developed a better sling for your arm and a better protocol that means you recover faster and whatever, right? So the quality is rising. So in the US, they do try and adjust for that, but then it's the opposite problem. Instead of just completely ignoring that, what they do is they basically use it to manipulate the numbers, where they say, oh, okay, they work backwards, like, oh, we want to have a low CPI, but CPI is pretty high. So what about if we look, what's high on this CPI list? Medical procedures, cost of that is rocketing up. But don't worry, guys, we've arbitrarily decided that it's 20% less painful when you get your arm fixed. So obviously you've got to factor that in and just knock that down, or maybe we'll reduce the percentage impact that has, or maybe we'll take it out of the numbers. And, you know, that's another way that they kind of fud the numbers. But it's pretty apparent to anybody who thinks it, like, I think a lot of this just comes from economics. People are not really taught economics because it's quite, I mean, they call it the dismal science, right? It's there's quite a lot of gray area in there. And the concept of a rising standard of living is quite hard to sort of reason through when you think about all this money. In the Bitcoin ideal, or in the Austrian economist type of view, the point is, if you have a fixed supply of money, as people's prices will go down, as well as people's lives getting better, and everyone will be happier. So essentially growth in the economy, which comes from people creating new goods and services, and therefore redistributing their time from one thing to another thing, will result in a better world for the people, right? The value of that economic growth directly translates into a better standard of living. You used to be able to have 3 burgers a week, but now you can have, 5. But at the moment, we're just being skimmed off the top, like not even skimmed, like it just wholesale chunks and chunks and chunks of that prosperity is being filtered out into the fresh money that is printed by the government, basically.
Or another way of saying it is, all this work that we're doing, this technology, is wasted, isn't it? That work that we did.
Well, yeah, it's getting, your time is getting stolen from you, and we're just offsetting. It's like trying to bail a bucket out of a ship with a hole in it, like, okay, we're scooping some out of the side, but we're not getting very far, or not getting as far as we could be, because there's always more water coming in the bottom,
So in an attempt to like really simplify this for my half asleep brain, would it be like, I remember hearing this example a long time ago about employment, like when we had the first agricultural settlements, and it took 25 people to get a crop set up. The invention of the plow wasn't an unemployment crisis. It was, oh, now you have 8 hours a day to just leisure around because one person can do the work of 25 people. But so is this saying that extra 8 hours a day that the other 24 people could get is being taken from them by the cost, by the either cost of inflation or devaluation of the money?
I think that sounds fair. Yeah, I think that sounds fair.
Okay.
It's just offsetting or negating is what I use in the essay as a word. Swapping it out so it's doing it by stealth. Another way I say it, sometimes it's making us more dependent on technology. We have to do it. So, so for example, my wife had to go on a strict diet and have organic flour and bread, and the bread loaf now that we can get has to be refrigerated. We don't do it now, but when we did, it was much smaller, and it was like $5 or something like that from the organic shop. And that was just one thing. That was a loaf of bread. Now, what the central bank, the Bureau of Statistics should be doing when they're, or the US, when they're calculating CPI, to be fair, they should really compare a loaf of bread, 50 years ago with this one that we had that was built with none of that technology in it. And if they did that, inflation probably would match the inflation rate.
That clicked for me. Thank you.
Yeah, and another way is like, what about if the power grid just turned off? Today, wouldn't society collapse? Well, that didn't used to happen. Like the economy used to be able to run without. I mean, not saying it was a great economy and life was hard, but if it did that now, we would have supply chain disruptions. It would be really problematic. Why is that? And I think it's just explaining that cost that we can't see, that's hidden because technology's doing a good thing. It's doing a good thing and it's letting us survive. But if we didn't have the inflationary money that we have, that all that technology would be just benefit, right? Like we would see the economic benefit in our lives, more freedom, that sort of thing. Maybe you wouldn't be working 8 hours a day. Maybe you would work 1 or 2, maybe you'd still be, maybe if you're working that less amount of hours, then you wouldn't be rolling in it. But some people might want to do that. And, I think they should be free to.
Yeah, it's just this. I mean, I'm certainly not the, economics, expert or university professor or anything in the world, but it essentially just comes down to the sort of reasoning from the simple examples like Jet was talking about, which is, okay, you had 25 people and each person could produce one meal worth of wheat per day that they were out farming the fields, right? And then somebody underconsumes, they take a day off, or in the evenings, they work extra hard. They have a genius idea. They come up with a better technology. Okay, guys, if we plant it 2 rows at a time, with 2 hands instead of 1 hand at a time, then we can do it twice as fast. So then that means you're getting the same amount of output with less amount of work, which frees up the time of the people in the meantime at the same standard of living. So then that's the magic of economics. Technology improves efficiency or innovations in process and so on, right? So then when you have that, then all that spare extra time, well, there's 2 things you can do. Either people laze about a bit more, which is a rise in your standard of living, or they reinvest that time and they think, oh, okay, well, now we have these people who are sitting around doing nothing. Maybe they start becoming artists, right? That now we can have a concert on Friday night that we couldn't have before, because we've got people who have the time and energy to sit around and learn to play a musical instrument and then put on a concert on Friday night. And then those people start selling tickets to that concert, and the farmers have money to buy it because they've improved their efficiency with their own economic gains, right? And so that's how it all works. And that's why now we live in a world where 1% or whatever it is, 0.5% or something of the population works on agriculture. And we have like the technology, the internet sector that you couldn't have ever had in the past. There just wasn't who would have worked in it. Everybody was busy doing something else. But over time, more and more and more industries get created as everyone's standard of living rises, because you need less and less people to support any one little function, right? Yeah, so that's kind of what it comes down to. And the point is, if you have a fixed supply money, then the benefit of all that huge explosion in growth directly flows back to the people in the economy. But yeah, it's like the leak in the boat. If you have a hole in your boat that's constantly just draining out that water, it's not being retained for the people, and it's constantly going off, back to the government and back to their cronies and whatever, and then they get to spend it and they get the benefit of it in the short term, but in the long term it just then circles around into the economy, prices rise, and so everybody is indirectly paying the cost of them skimming out their little section. So hopefully that's why the crypto economy, despite how volatile and rough it is, has boomed because if you're in crypto, on average, you're doing a lot better because all the innovation in the BCH economy, I mean, it's a bit of a weird case because BCH has struggled on price for a lot of other reasons, but essentially, and going forward, especially, we should be starting to see that as the community innovates and all the productivity amongst ourselves, it's flowing back into the holders rather than off somewhere else. So even though we are a very small community and network, we're still able to outcompete much larger economies because the efficiency is so much higher, relatively speaking. So yeah. Anyway, people can check out this this article that you've written. It was really good, and I do especially like that point about it would only be fair to compare a bread made in the 50s with bread made today using the same techniques that they made in the 50s. That's a really good way of thinking about it. Okay, next slide. So we've got, here we go, last couple segments. Community comment of the week comes from Mark Falzon, and he was at the Bitcoin conference, so he was giving a bit of an insider view of what's going on there. And he said, who cares about Bitcoin? Well, I'd reckon all the people who are going to be butthurt when I onboard all the businesses across from the BTC convention to accept BCH care about Bitcoin. Speaking of which, already got 2 merchants on board. And I think this kind of goes to your point that you were saying, the BCH community, they're pragmatic. They're focused on real adoption with real people. Like you said, talking to the Chamber of Commerce, spreading education, spreading adoption, creating new peer-to-peer trade links. And because at Bitcoin BTC, the conference, not a lot of people were even using Bitcoin. Like, network activity didn't spike. Why? Because probably not that many people were actually trading Bitcoin at the conference. And there was people commenting, oh, the vendors don't even accept Lightning, or they don't accept Bitcoin, or what are we doing here? Everybody's just paying US dollars. Well, it would be pretty amazing if Mark and Ryan Giffen as well, and some of those people that are in Florida, if they can get a lot of BCH merchant adoption going on, and then next year people come back for the conference and it's the Bitcoin conference, but the whole surrounding area is trading Bitcoin Cash, that would just be amazing. So it kind of made me laugh.
Mark's great. I'm a little bit jealous, like a filmmaker, but he's just taken off, hasn't he? I'm not really. I love my life, but yeah, he just does great. With the short videos, he's down to earth. For a young audience, I think he's fantastic. So I'm really glad he's decided to, spend his time doing this. So I think it's well worth it. So good on him. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. You're doing absolutely killer work. I love to see it, and it's a classic example, I think, of opportunities being created in the space, that he's found this niche and he's got funded through Flipstarter and all. It is starting to work. More and more people will end up falling into that model over time, and because there is real growth and real progress and real momentum, it just doesn't quite have the hype. But as soon as we get a bit of hype going, there'll be people just saying, what's going on here? And then it's very high proof of passion. Basically, it's very, very tough work, but very rewarding if you get it right. Something like adopting a lot of merchants and then staying in contact with them and getting them the detail. Here's how you save your seed phrase. This is what it's all about. Peer-to-peer cash, blah, 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 blah. Takes a lot to explain, but if you lift the heaviest weights, you get the strongest in the long run. And that's essentially how the BCH community operates. All right. Meme of the week is from Sally Mayweather, who I'm a big fan of. One of the biggest libertarian agorist sort of Twitter accounts, and also a big BCH fan. So he sometimes gets in a few roasts on the BTC maxis, which is pretty funny because I think gets followed by a lot of people, and then they're like, why are you such a big fan of BCH? So he just slips it in there once in a while. So he's got the meme is this. It's this meme of the kind of grandpa type guy who's got the kind of awkward smile and the thumbs up, and it's usually like some scenario where he's getting a bit wrecked but still trying to put on a brave face, or maybe doesn't really understand what's going on. And it says, when you get a 3% raise but inflation is 5.4% crossed out, 6.2% crossed out, 6.6% crossed out, 7% crossed out, 7.5% crossed out, 7.9% crossed out, 8.5%. And he's been doing this meme consistently. He's been updating it with a new crossed out and a new number every time the new CPI comes out, and it's just higher and higher and higher. So he made this first one, when you get a 3% raise but inflation is 5.4%, like a few months ago, and at this stage it's just escalated to more and more and more and more and more. And it's just, this is this is where we're at. We're just at a point of ridiculousness. It's just gonna transitory inflation. Well, it wasn't that transitory. Like you were saying about there always being another reason, you know. First it was transitory, then it was oil prices, then it was Putin. Next it'll be Elon Musk buying Twitter. You know, there's always some reason that inflation is getting higher. It's never the actual real reason, which is money printing is at insane levels, and the economy can't innovate fast enough to keep up. So that's what's happening. But people are not getting that story. They're not going to see that written on, you know, the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. That's for sure. So
yeah, I don't think it'll be too long until we won't have to try hard to convince people. Hey, like it's crazy at the moment. And look, I hope it settles down. I'm not so sure that it will. I really wish it was, you know, I really wish it wouldn't have to be so destructive. And I mean, I don't know the future. I don't think any of us do, but it's hard to know how it will play out. But it just would have been nice if crypto was a smooth on-ramp, you know, for businesses to get comfortable with it. And that's what I really hope happens. That we don't have, it doesn't fall off a cliff. You know what I mean? Because you know, it's just not nice for people. You know, it's just so much cost to families and businesses, communities. So either way, you know, crypto, BCH, it's going to be there to help and collect people. You know, stop the economy from just being completely destroyed. But hopefully it's just, you know, it's a nice smooth on ramp.
Yeah, I hope so.
What do you think it'll be?
Well, I think it's going to be a little bit messy. I think it's probably, you're not looking at like apocalypse type of scenarios only because crypto is there. And I think there's just sort of a natural check and balance in that way. It's sort of the tragedy of crypto is that everybody's going out, Bitcoin, freaking listen to me. Like Bitcoiners or crypto people are known for being so evangelistic, so passionate, so sort of like stubborn and like persistent and even annoying and all that stuff. But the reason that they are is because it's a big issue and it's important and it affects everyone. And some of that gets lost in the, you know, the Ponzi scheming and the mania and whatever. But underlying it all, there is just like, just listen, please. Gosh, how many times do we have to tell you before you start to get it? And obviously, if people won't learn the easy way, they're going to have to learn the hard way. There's just no other way around it. And as much as I would love it if everybody would listen to this show, read up on crypto, try it out a little bit, think through, wait, why are prices going up all the time? What you know, but I think crypto just has an element of staying power that its very existence begs the question here. And this is why it's so important because, okay, there was problems with inflation. Peter Schiff has been banging on about inflation for decades. But the thing was, gold was not getting the job done. Nobody cared. All right, you had gold, a couple of banks, whatever. Nobody gave a shit. But now you just cannot ignore crypto. It's just constantly getting bigger. More people are talking about it. And eventually, like you were saying, you just come to a point where you think, what is going on here? I just need to look into this. What am I missing? How has this not just gone away or stopped being a thing or whatever? And certainly people are more and more and more open-minded to it as it's been around longer, so it seems less scammy and less weird and less unusual, especially if you're young. And also as inflation ramps up and the same message which has been said, don't trust the government, they're screwing with your money, blah, 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 blah. The longer that goes on, the more it resonates around the population, I think. So yeah, it's definitely, our work is getting easier. And I think if there is some sort of fairly smooth transition out of this, disaster, then the world will seriously underappreciate how much Satoshi has saved everyone's bacon, basically. But I don't know. It's going to be fun. We're going to be here to watch it all happen. So, for better or worse, we'll be following it, I guess.
If volatility is the biggest concern for merchants, and this that's an assumption I'm taking. I don't know what the largest concern for merchants is. But if that's the case, then we just have to wait for inflation to have more of a downside than the downside from the volatility. And then, I mean, hey, if you've got something that's guaranteed going to deflate at 8.5%, I'd say it'll probably be 12.5% before people are like, Jesus Christ, what's going on here? Then they'll be like, oh, well, I might as well take the risk on the upside of 40% or 70% or something like that. Because even if I don't get there, I'm at least not guaranteed losing, this other percentage. I think once those numbers get closer together, there's going to be a larger proportion of people being like, all right, might as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happened in Argentina and Lebanon and maybe now in Ukraine and different, once the need for it arises, people get it fast. It really is not a case that crypto is so scary or so difficult or impossible to understand. Like, you can understand what's going on in an hour or two, especially if you have someone there to explain it to you. Just a few simple things about it, show you a transaction, tell you to look after your seed words. All right, it's a deep rabbit hole, so you can go a long way down. But that fundamental idea, everybody understands money and trading and peer-to-peer transactions. It's just a slightly new way of thinking about it. And yeah, so as the fiat economy gets into ever greater depths of disaster, like for instance, the huge problems with debt around the world, all these consumers are just looking for a way out. And that's what crypto is there for, really. All right, second last slide. Message to the community. You've watched this show a bunch, you know the drill. What's your message?
I think the Bitcoin Cash community is doing everything right. I agree with you, just that the past that is there is gone now. So I think it should only be uphill, should only be downhill now. Like it's going to be easy, I think. The branding is great, I think. Like it's got the Bitcoin name in there, and the cash tells people quickly. Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty good, but we just need to keep being kind to people, being accepting, especially those Bitcoiners that, thought they were onto the right thing. I think a lot of those people will come around really easy. So we just need to make sure we're welcoming when they do. And that, I think that mostly happens. So that's great. So, and thank you for welcoming me as well. Like, I'm a bit of a newbie, so I got here, so many more will.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see. And for me, I think it's very important that we see that. And I've been very glad on this show to have had a huge range of adopters of BCH, right? Because I remember back when it was way back when, but nobody cares about that, right? Like that, that's what I think. But if Bitcoin Cash was a thing that got to the fork and some diehards stayed with it, and then it just became the old remember back in the day, and it just that would have been the end of it. It would have died. But it's so encouraging to me to interview people on this show who come in, just before the fork. And then, well, we've had some OGs, and we had, people who came in before the fork, and then people who were a bit after the fork. And then, like you were saying, in 2019, that was, a bit more after the fork, and you sort of slowly found your way in there. And Neanderthal that we had where he was talking about 2020 and 2021. And at some point, we'll have people who are just getting into it 2022, right? The community needs new growth. It needs new people. If we're not getting the message through to new people, then it's over sooner or later. So it's just amazing to see that the community does have that aspect. It does have a message that is ringing true to people, and that people can see and understand, maybe not right off the bat because it's not the most hyped one on Coinbase or whatever. But like you said, eventually people kind of think, why is there a different version of Bitcoin? Like what is going on? It does sort of stand out from the crowd a little bit in that aspect. There's not Bitcoin and then Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then Litecoin. Like having Bitcoin in there at all, it's like, how are these guys getting away with it? Why isn't every other coin trying to scam off the brand? Like what's different about this one? I don't know. Maybe that's an element to it too. I don't know. All right, cool. Well, I think that'll do it for the show then. That's BitcoinCashPodcast.com. You can check it out for all your links and information, resources, whatever, start guide. Check out the project on Odyssey, Rumble, or BitChute. I'm trying to shill these alternative ones because I follow this guy Styx Hexenhammer on Odyssey. He has a lot of great banter, and he's basically proactively pushing for people to spread out from YouTube so that we don't all get screwed when the censors come there as well too, which is, I guess, inevitable at some point or another. Thank you to the donators, as always, very much appreciated. And that peer-to-peer economy, you love to see it. Thanks to Ricky, my Patreon. And do you have any shout outs for the show, Duncan? Anybody you want to give a special mention to? Where can people find you? I guess I should say thank you to the devs. Like they have been, a lot of them since the early days, and they, that past is there. So thank you for doing all the work that you do. And I recognize it, and I think in time lots of other people will recognize it. So just a thank you, really. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the link, I'll put it in the description, but the link to your article and stuff is on the slides too. Definitely want to echo that. Love the devs. BCH has the best devs by far. I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. Like, it's just, we've got the upgrade coming up as well too. The Smart BCH is getting upgraded in 4 or 5 days. Some good stuff in the works there. And then it's 1 month till the May upgrade with bigger integers and native introspection. So I'm sure we'll cover that more at the time. But BCH is quietly, it's got this little quiet engine of, it's just absolutely crushing it. Any shout outs you want to give, Jet?
No, not this week.
All right, we're good this week. Well, then, thank you for listening, everyone, and until next time.
We're coming for you, Banks. I wasn't born last night. I know the money ain't right, but I was coding up the future last night. You were busy hating with your stupid friends online. That the Federal Reserve stealing paychecks straight out of your purse. Today they got $1, tomorrow got 9. Your savings are in dollars and your value in decline. Google it. Knowing Federal Reserve, things are going burr, but it seems that you ain't heard. Nervous, cash in the bank now, where you think it goes? Stupid little fuck, you trust the government shows.
While the rich banks rob ya,
Robbing you blind, man.
future dollars can buy nothing for ya.
You've heard of inflation, right?
Banks fucked you royal.